Hi everybody, welcome to the sports stream. Today we'll be talking about mobile development. We've got Josh Adams, Peter Sauerbrei, and Chris Babcock here with us today. We're going to go ahead and start up with a project and show you how everything goes start to finish, and then we'll discuss what's going to be coming and a couple other things, and then we have a nice Q&A session. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll be picking them up and throwing them into a list. All right, Josh, you want to take it away?
Sure. Well, first maybe we'll introduce who we are here. So I'm the lead of the platform team, so we do a lot of platforms. In particular, we have Pete here, who runs the iOS stuff, and Chris, who runs the Android stuff. So there's a lot of knowledge here for questions later on. Okay. Anything else you want to say about yourselves? How awesome you are?
They're very awesome.
They're super awesome.
Super awesome.
All right, so
Very
here
quiet.
is the launcher, as we've all seen. We'll just start it up. Ignore the red blob down there. It looks weird. I think we're watching. All right, so I'll make a new project from scratch. Let's do 2D side scroller because it's fun for mobile. Down here at the option or at the bottom, there's some options. You can choose what sort of device family you're targeting. You can change these later. It's not a hard and fast. It doesn't mean you'll never be able to run on mobile if you choose console, but it's sort of some pre-made settings. So we're going to go with mobile. Maximum quality. These are also, again, just settings it sets up ahead of time. Why not go for maximum 2D side scrolling? Sure. Starter content, this choice here, if you pick with starter content, it will import a whole bunch of pre-made content that we give you that you can drop right into your projects. But it can make the projects a little bigger. So just for this case, we're going to do no starter content. And then down here, we'll call this awesome app. Because that's how awesome it's going to be. Create the project. Let it do its thing. Sorry, the splash screen is off the screen that you guys see.
You can't move the splash screen.
Can't move the splash screen.
No.
It's another monitor.
Feature request.
So I can, there's the loading progress number. 85. 86. I can be the progress meter.
Yeah, you could let them know what's up.
Yeah.
And we're picturing pictures so they can see you.
95.
Oh, that showed
96.
All right.
Drag it over. Okay, so here is our favorite blue man. Side scroller. I'm sure you guys have all seen this before. At least in the editor. You can do a new editor window. You can preview it. Oh, it keeps going to the wrong monitor. This guy like dragging this over. And here we are. Yay, I can jump. All right. But you may not have seen or played with too much the mobile preview, which will open a new window with this project. But it's a standalone program, but it runs the renderer in a mode that uses the mobile shaders. Still running within, on the desktop. So it's not actually running exactly ES2, but it's running the same feature set and with the shaders that you would have on mobile. And it is booting up, but you can't see the splash screen because it's on the other monitor. But trust me, it's booting. And it's almost there. There it is.
No.
So now it's compiling shaders. So these shaders are new shaders because the editor wasn't using the ES2 versions. You can see up here it's using D3D_ES2, which means it's rendering with D3D, but using the ES2 feature set. So since the editor wasn't in that mode, it has to compile the shaders. But it's a little mode preview. You can have a little virtual thumbstick here that I can use. Okay. So you can use this to get a pretty good idea of what it will look like on device with the shaders and everything that are on the devices without needing to deploy and have some of that iteration time. So it can be a little faster to do it in the mobile preview. Let's just give this quit out of here. So back in the editor, so now if we want to put it on a device and play with it, all I have to do is go down to this drop down. Well, first of all, depending on the platform you're targeting, you may need to install some prerequisites. For instance, for Android, you need to install the Android SDK, and we do include an installer in the engine extras Android directory. In the engine, there's an installer for the TADP, which is the Tegra Android Development Pack, I think.
Yes.
And so that has the Java bits and the compilers and all the tools for deploying. So if you just run that installer and then quit the editor and the launcher, when you start back up again, it'll have all the environment variables set, and it'll just find all the bits. If you've already installed the Android SDK yourself previously, or you just don't want to restart the editor and the launcher, or if things like don't seem to be working right for whatever reason, if you go to product settings, and down in Android SDK, you can actually click here and point the engine at where the paths are to the various bits of the SDK. I'm not going to go through it here, but this will override anything. So if these are set, it'll use these values. And it'll use them right away. So as soon as you set it here, then the engine can start looking for devices that are plugged in, using the tools and all that. So if you have any problems finding devices, give these a try here by setting these values.
And also for Android, you need to make sure you have an ADB driver installed.
Yes. On Windows, yeah, you need the driver, and it's different for every device manufacturer. Samsung has their own drivers. The Nexus 5, actually, those should be installed already by TADP, just the standard Google drivers. But whatever your device is, it may or may not actually have the drivers installed. One thing you can do to test out if the driver's working is in a command prompt in Windows. Once you've installed everything and have the path set up, you should be able to run ADB space devices. And if you see a device listed here, which it is plugged in, although I'm not sure if it's offline, there's an Android device plugged in somewhere. Anyway, if you see the device here, that means you have a driver installed. It shouldn't say offline, though. It should say device.
Yeah.
Any ideas on that one? Why it says offline?
Might be because we had an ADB session we started a launch on earlier. May not have released it.
No, they all, well, whatever. This is where you go to sort of troubleshoot to see if the driver's installed properly. If it doesn't list it here, there's no way that the engine can see it, because we use ADB to find the plugged-in devices. And another thing to note is that this SDK setting here applies to all projects. You don't need to set it per project. Even though it's under project settings, this actually is stored in your user, my documents, whatever directory, and these settings are global to all projects. Okay, so we're actually going to install on iOS. One, I guess is probably worth mentioning, in 4.7, we have this iterative deploy concept. So when you deploy to iOS in 4.7, it will only install the files that are newer when you cook them. With Android, because of strange timestamp issues that we had to work around, in 4.7, it will recopy all your data every time. In 4.8, we worked around that. And so going forward in 4.8, you will see much faster iteration times on Android when you're only changing a little bit, a few pieces of content. But in this case, we're going to pick iOS.
One thing to note is that said all iOS devices. We're on a PC here today. On a Mac, it should actually list out your individual devices that are connected.
So weird. Is it, we can find that out? Can we find that out now?
We can find that out
Using
now.
some
We just
triggering?
haven't done it yet.
Yeah, so soon that will list the device, but that's plugged in, or devices.
Yeah.
Coming soon to an engine version near you. Okay, so what's happening is, it already cooked all the content. We had run this once already, so it already converted all the textures to PVR-TC. We'd run a similar project and compiled shaders for ES2. But the very first time you ever run the engine and you cook something, it actually needs to convert the textures from raw textures into PVR-TC, which is the texture format that iOS uses. Similar for Android, although there's like 5 different texture formats on Android. So the very first time you do it, it's going to take longer to do that first conversion of all the projects, but it caches the results of those conversions. And so the next time you do it, it doesn't have to do it. So there is,
It's there.
can we see?
Just hard to see.
Running on the device?
It's a little small, but it's on the screen there.
Yeah. So, and then just to show iteration time, let's fiddle with something. So now you're going to see why there was that red thing before. Let's go into the material, and we'll make constant. Let's, instead of red, let's go, to be crazy here, go blue. I know, it's pretty nuts. And we'll use that instead of the vertex color. Apply the change. Close material editor, close the instance. Okay, now everything is blue. Maybe that actually wasn't good with the blue man, but that's okay. not trying to make anything pretty here. So once you picked a device in the drop-down, you can actually just click on launch, and it will reuse the last device you had clicked on. Now, when you're doing this from the editor, you don't need to actually save the content because it's going to just cook out the in-memory version of the asset in the editor. So you can actually skip the saving process if you want. So now it's doing the cooking. It should only cook what's newer, which is just the material. And now it's sending everything over. I think it actually recopies the executable every time, but not all the content every time.
For Android, it will only copy over the executable if there were any changes that required code changes.
Okay. With iOS, it gets kind of packaged into one thing. So if anything changes at all, we have to touch the package, and it recopies over the executable. But the content is a.
Uh-oh.
That is not blue.
That is not blue. Huh.
You sure that was the right? That was awesome game, not.
I'll check again.
Oh yeah.
Awesome app. Awesome app. Yeah.
Huh. Well, we did our red test.
It worked with the red test.
It did deploy over there.
Huh.
So there may be a bug of some sort.
Well, here. There's the red test.
Yes, there was when it was red. Okay.
Red test worked.
So,
test.
yay for live demos, not always working right. But anyway, that's generally the kind of iteration time you're going to see. One thing to note on Windows right now, it can't run the game itself, so you have to, it'll deploy it, put it on the device, but you have to click on the icon on the screen. Was it running when we need to quit it? Anyway, but if you're doing on the Mac, then we can run the executable directly from the Mac, so it'll auto-launch the game and boot. Yeah, so that's a little demo. Sorry I didn't actually work with the iteration there, or for the blue, because I know you were very excited to see the blue platforms with the blue guy.
Maybe you should try red. Maybe red will work.
Maybe red would have worked. I don't know. I messed something up. Obviously, maybe I should hit save. But
Actually, maybe you
did.
didn't need to hit save.
I didn't hit save last time with the red test.
I'm pretty sure you
Let's
don't
just try
have
it.
to on 4.8, but you might need to have still done that on 4.7.
Yeah, whatever. Hit save and see what happens. So while that's going,
Speaking of changes that are coming,
yes.
yeah, you want to go over a few of the new fancy new things that are coming while this loads?
Actually, yeah. So in 4.7, you may notice, especially if you've tried this and you put in the starter content or you have a lot of test maps in there, when you package your game, actually that's worth talking, just showing it here, is this launch button will take whatever the level is that's currently loaded, cook it out in all its dependencies, and put them on the device and run that map. But sometimes you want to test going from map to map to map, and so this isn't always the appropriate thing to do. So then what you can do is you go to File, Package Project.
Oh yeah,
And
there we go.
It is blue. Well,
it's
the
blue.
same.
You had to
hitting
save it.
that
You
time.
had to
I
save it.
swear I
That
didn't have
was
to save
it.
it
Very
before.
blue.
Should have been
I
memory.
can't even see my guy.
Yeah.
I cannot explain why we're seeing what we're seeing.
You know, it's
Works
usual
out.
that the chat will sit here and be like, save, 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 because they get really worried something bad's going to happen. And here we are. It was saved the whole time.
Yeah.
Save.
Anyway, so all right, fine. Hit save before you. Hold on. Anyway, so if you click on Package Project and you could choose iOS here, or you can choose Android and a texture format to pick from. Because this is not based on a plugged-in device, we don't know what texture format you want to support for Android. Hopefully you're familiar with Android texture format soup. There's many different formats here. ASTC is coming. I think it should be in 4.8 on Android. We also have ASTC support for iOS because Metal API supports ASTC. For iOS, however, that's a little different. It's a project setting if you want to have ASTC support, which should be in here.
Sure, it's not under render settings.
Is that in render settings? Maybe we didn't expose ASTC yet, but we have ASTC support for iOS. Somewhere. Here's Metal support, which we have turned on. Another feature request: expose ACC options. Anyway, maybe that's in 4.8. Actually, that might be, yeah, it's probably 4.8, not 4.7. I keep forgetting we're in 4.7 here. It's so old. God. All right. Anyway, yeah, so you file package, and right now what happens is if you don't make any changes to your ini files manually, which we don't like to make you guys do, it will actually cook all the maps and all the content you have in your project. So if you put starter content in there and you file a package, it will be huge and take a long time.
Just to clarify before we move on too far, chat wants to know just specifically what is ATC and what all does that mean?
Okay, so there's ATC and ASTC. ATC is the old ATI texture compression, which is what the Qualcomm/Adreno GPUs use natively on some Android devices. ASTC is adaptive something texture compression, and it's kind of like the new hotness for texture compression, where it can scale. It can change block sizes. There's a lot of different settings when you're making ASTC textures. And so you can change how much compression it gets, so you can dial your quality. And there's also, you can dial how long it takes to compress, which will also improve the quality. But it's part of, is it in the 3.1 standard?
It is in the 3.1.
Okay, it's not an ES3.0, it's an ES3.1 standard. It's not part of AEP? That was,
AEP does support ASDC.
yeah, but does 3.1 base support it?
I believe it does not on Android. I think you have to have the AEP for that.
Okay, so in Android, there's this Android extension pack, which some devices support, which mandates you support ASTC on the device. A lot of new GPUs are supporting it. iOS, anything, Metal supports it as a texture format, but not with ES2 or ES3. But it's a much better quality texture compression, and you can really dial your quality versus size. So you can have bigger textures, but for your normal maps, you may need that super crisp edging, and so you don't want to have bad compression artifacts in there. Normal maps, it really shows up when you have bad compression artifacts.
Same thing with light maps.
In light maps. So it's one format that can do a lot of things. So it's new, kind of pretty new to the engine. It's in there for Android and for iOS. May not be exposed, right? Especially not in 4.7, but I think in 4.8 it's exposed for both Android and iOS.
Just be aware that it is not supported by all Android devices, so you will still need to have packages available for other texture compression formats.
Yeah, unless if you're targeting one particular high-end Android device, then maybe you can do it. But it's one of those future-looking things, so we have support in there now for it. And with iOS, you can enable ASCC and PVR, so you can have one package with both textures that will use ASCC if it's supported on the device. And same with Metal, you can have Metal and ES2 enabled. Okay, so all that aside, if you want to minimize the size of your packages when you do a file package, then you would need to edit an ini file, make an all maps section. Is it called all maps? I think it's all map sections, and like plus map equals map name, plus map equals map name. It's nothing that we really want to make you guys do. So in 4.8, it's actually in the file package project packaging settings, which are actually in product settings, under packaging up here. And there will be, down here in this more advanced section, there'll be a way to list out the maps that you want to cook. So when you file a package, it'll only cook the maps that are listed. And that way, it'll only cook those maps and what they're dependent on. And if there are things you need to load dynamically that aren't referenced directly by map, then you can use these other arrays here for other direct, like, I'm not sure if we'd add more in 4.8 for like per package compression or per package control, but you can specify like this directory of hats I want to make sure is always cooked in there because I'm going to dynamically load the hat that you're going to wear.
Right.
So once you start doing only the maps, then it won't cook everything, so you're going to have to be more explicit about what you want it to get cooked over there.
So what Josh is trying to say is that if something is referenced in a map, it will automatically get cooked if that map is cooked. But if you have a bunch of hats that aren't referenced in any map because eventually a player will download them and then add them to their character in some fashion via your user interface, then you're going to have that extra directory cooked as well because nothing else references it. So that's what these extra asset directories are. And then there's a couple other ones for non-cooked assets to make sure that they actually get into your package as well. So like, for instance, if you had a SQLite database, for instance, that was storing all of, where those hats were, then that would, you don't need to cook that. We don't need to do anything to cook it, but we do need to make sure it gets into your package for Android and iOS. So that stuff will just get copied directly in.
Yep. So there's a lot of control, but once you start getting more advanced, figuring out exactly what you want to package up. If you're found a game, you may need to go to that level of control. And especially if you turned on starter content, there's a lot of stuff in there that you don't want to get packaged. So, yeah. So that's coming in 4.8. I know that the package size is a big concern for a lot of people in UE4. So we've been looking at a lot of things, how to minimize the packages. We got Tappy Chicken down pretty small, but we did have to do some trickery to get it that small. And so everything we've done for Tappy Chicken, we're trying to make sure that you guys can easily do in a setting inside the editor. Like compiling the executable for size, or disabling slate, or what other
Turning
things there
on
are.
pack compression.
Turn on packet. Well, the pack compression should be on by default in 4.8, I think. Maybe not,
In
hopefully.
4.8, it's now an option in the project settings. Before
Okay.
this, you needed to put it onto the cook line.
Yeah. So one big thing is for minimizing the data size is you can compress all the packages that are in the file or in the package project, which is a good. It can be 2-to-1 compression, better or worse depending on what's in there, but it can do great things for your download size, for sure. So everything that we want. I'm not sure every option is exposed in 4.8, but hopefully by 4.9, everything that we ever do to make Tappy Chicken 20 megs or whatever it is, will be in there. Now on iOS, you may know that there's severe limitations, not limitations, but there's a big issue of the executable where Apple requires you submit 32 and 64-bit binary, which we have support for, but that means that you will double the size of the executable. And so when you're doing a small game like a Tappy Chicken, the majority of what you're downloading is that double the sized executable. And there's nothing we can do about Apple's requirements, but we do. That's why we're doing the exposing compiling for size, turning off plugins you don't need, or if you have source code access, you can start turning off modules potentially, depending on what your game needs. Like Slate is a big thing. If you don't use Slate or UMG for your UI, then disabling Slate would be a pretty huge win. Or if you don't need to localize anything, you can probably get rid of a bunch of the ICU data files. So that is we understand it's a big concern for you guys, something that we're trying to address going forward.
We're also trying to address executable size in general too. Compile for size is one of the first lines, but I mean obviously we're looking at ways we can actually reduce that just in general across the board in many ways. It's just slow going. So I know, like in the case of Tappy Chicken, it's 60 megabyte download right now, and 55 of that is executables. So we're working as hard as we can to try to figure out what we can do to reduce that size, so that hopefully we can start getting download sizes that are more amenable to the smaller games. That executable size isn't such a big deal for IB3, which has got hundreds of megabytes of data to go along with it. But for a Tappy Chicken, where the actual content size is like 2 megabytes, that significantly increases the size. So for those types of games, we certainly want to try to get a smaller executable.
All right. So let's see here. I'm going to scroll down a little bit
Alright.
on there.
So
I'm going to go over this stuff in the list.
is there something you want to talk about, Chris, here?
Okay, with 4.8, we've been continuing to work on compatibility with some of the lower and mid-range Android devices. In particular, we're now recognizing the Adreno 200 series, and some of the lower-end 300 are now functioning properly, as well as the PowerVR 540 and 544 are working correctly now. We're also made some modifications to the device selection plugin, which now will provide default profile selection for these devices. You can go in and take a look at the source code to see which of the profiles we're providing, and we've got a few examples in some of the sample content that have been updated to use some of the settings for lowering memory usage by dropping MIP levels and a few other things in 4.8 to try to deal with devices that have lower memory.
Okay. So another thing with coming in 4.8 is an option we're calling cook on the side, which is right now in the editor, when you do launch on, it will take all your content and cook it out, save it to disk, and then install the whole thing onto the device. There's another cooking mode that the engine has that you guys may not be exposed to very much, which is it's cook on the fly. These are funny names, I know, but the idea is that the PC or the Mac acts as a file server for a device. So you could take your game and never deploy anything to the device except for the executable. You can run the executable on the device. It actually connects back to the PC and says, hey, I want to load this map or all these, whatever, I want to load whatever files. The PC says, oh, I need to cook that map real quick, or this asset or whatever. It will cook that asset, send it over the network to the device where it's then cached locally, and then it's loaded. So in that way, if you're using that mode, then you don't need to know ahead of time what you want to cook. You can actually just boot the game and load anything you want to do, and the file serving host, PC or Mac, will do all the right things. It'll give you exactly what you're asking for. And it will cache it locally, so it doesn't have to transfer over the network every time. So we've always had this thing, the cook on the fly server, that you could run as in a command line or through Unreal front end or whatever, but it's not very accessible to you guys for the most part. So now we're enabling what we call cook on the side, where the editor itself is the file server. So you could say launch, you could enable the button, which is coming in 4.8. You can enable the cook on the side feature, and when you launch, it doesn't actually do all the pre-cooking and deploying over the device. It just launches the game, and if your game is already installed on the device, it can just start it right up. It won't need to redeploy everything or anything. And then we'll ask the editor to load the map and cook the map if it needs to. If the map that it wants to load isn't already loaded, the editor will, in the background, load the map, cook it, all its assets, and send them over. So there may be a little bit of a slowdown in the editor while it's cooking maps in the background, which that's the on the side part is another map sort of to the side of the current map that you don't see, but the editor is loading it and cooking it. So we're hoping that will be another way to sort of help iteration time even further, where you can just, if you don't make any code changes, just launch it again and you'll get new content. And eventually this is all sort of leading up to, in the distant future, the Cooker 3.0 is the code name for it, but that's the idea where you make an asset change in the editor and it'll send that change over the network to the device and it reloads it, and you're going to see your content changes immediately on the device. So this is all sort of leading up to that awesome future.
Wow.
We're not there yet.
I have a funny feeling that at least a few people out there have no idea what we mean by the word cook, though.
Oh,
So,
Yeah, that's probably a
It's
good
cooking.
point. That's a good point there, Peter.
okay.
because that's very much an unrealism.
Yes.
Okay.
What is cooking versus packaging?
Yeah.
Okay, so cooking is, all it means is we take content that you loaded in the editor and you cook it for another platform. So when you take a texture and you cook it for iOS, it loads the texture into memory in the editor. It says, oh, I need to convert this raw, just blob of texture, which I imported from a TGA or whatever, or PNG, and I need to compress it. So it'll see if it needs to be compressed, if it's not cached already, the compressed data, and then it takes that compressed data, throws out the raw data in the package, jams in the compressed data, saves that out, and then the iOS or Android or whatever platform can then load that package and has the data in the exact right format that it needs for that particular platform. So it's what we call cooking. Other, I'm sure, engines and whatever have called it different things in the past. Packaging, all packaging is taking your cooked files and things like ini files and whatever else, icons and things, puts it all together into a directory and then packages it up for whatever platform. So in the case of Android, it makes an APK file. For iOS, it makes a .ipa. For PS4, it makes whatever I can't talk about. So, and in Windows right now, when you package for Windows, it just copies a bunch of files into a directory that are just the files that are needed to run. So it doesn't zip it or make an installer, it just makes a directory. You can then do your own zipping or installer based on that. But yeah, so that's packaging. So packaging happens after you cook.
All right.
Hopefully that explains it all.
Okay. Some other features for Android that are coming with 4.8 is, since we now generate the Android manifest XML in code, there are now a number of different overrides available to use that will add extra sections to parts of the generated XML. You can also now completely override the permission section if you wanted to remove some of the permissions that we were automatically adding. Also,
Can you zoom in on this maybe?
with 4.8, you can add additional tags to the manifest, application, and activity nodes that are generated in the Android manifest.
So there's probably,
Also-
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. As well, we now also allow the package and project name do not have to match. Before, it was possible for you to go in and change the package name to be something other than the package project name, and it would not actually launch on the device properly because it wouldn't find the files that were being referenced. That's also been fixed in 4.8. So it's now possible to put a different package name than the actual project name. Another feature in 4.8 is I had a pull request for being able to access when the Android menu and volume keys were used. This has been added, and there is now a additional feature where you can turn on or off whether or not the system will receive the volume keys. So if you wanted to override the volume keys and use them as for controls in your game, you now have the option of doing that. By default, they go back to the system to control the audio volume.
Speaking of the manifest, there's, I think, been some confusion or questioning as to why we changed it to generate the Android manifest instead of just finding one that's on disk that you guys can hand edit. And the reason for that is because with as we're adding more features into the product settings here, so that it's easy for everyone to be able to make changes to how their package is set up, we're having to go into the manifest and try to manually update certain values in there and add things in and maybe take things out. And it was getting very messy and buggy. So we decided that we would take all the important settings that we could think of and expose them in the product settings. So everything that, well, everything, most things that you'd want to be able to modify in the Android manifest, we expose as a setting. We know that we'd miss some, so we added these extra sections here to be able to insert text into the Android manifest. And when we did it, we didn't put enough of these properties in to be able to edit everything that you'd want to be able to edit, to be able to insert into the Android manifest. So what Chris was getting at is that we've added a bunch more of these things here, so you can add new tags into the Android or the application bracket part of the XML versus whole new sections underneath the application section in XML.
And if you've got a lengthy amount of information you need to add to these sections, it can also load it from a file.
Oh yeah. Make sure that's basically, instead of typing in this multi-line thing with /n's into this one text box, it actually ended up being hard to have multi-line edit here for some reason. Because of the way we store to any files, it was unfortunate. But so if you have this complex settings here, you can put them into text files in your project build Android directory.
Correct.
With the right names, and it'll just insert those automatically, so you don't have to do it here. And then you can just check those files into Portfors also, or into your source control for your team. Okay, so maybe it's worth talking about how to actually take a game that you made and
sell
put
it
it on the store.
Yeah,
Yes.
time to make some money.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
Get paid. Okay, so it's a little different process for Android versus iOS. So you guys want to go over maybe for your platform? I can also talk about it if you want.
Oh.
All right, we'll start with Android because it's open here.
Yeah.
Okay, with Android, the first thing you're going to do here is you will see that you have a version number. There are actually two version numbers here. The version code, which is the number between 1 and 65535, that needs to be increased each time you put up an update. So you want to probably start that one at 1 for your first release and move it up each time you put out a patch. The other one is just for display purposes. And if you scroll down a little bit further, it's a little hard for me to see here.
See down there.
Look at the bottom.
Okay. You're going to also need to create a distribution key. This will be your key store. There are instructions up on the website for creating the key store. And what you're going to do is place your key store file in your project's build Android directory. It will get copied over and used for the actual build of the APK and the signing. You're also going to put in the name of the file here. You don't need to put a path because it's going to come from that build Android, and you're going to want to put in your key alias that you're using for the sign and the store password that you used when you generated the key store.
Yeah, these settings make a little more sense when you go through the steps of making the keys. The key store, that you'll see these like dash parameters when you go through the documentation. So it may not make sense just looking at it here, but it does make sense once you go through the steps. And this is required before you can put it up for onto the store, you have to do this part.
The next thing you're going to want to be doing is go to the dashboard for Android and actually set up your application. There are steps up on the Android documentation site which will go through how to actually set that up. It's the same for any Android project you're going to do, and you're going to get an app ID which can be placed, if you scroll down a little further.
Isn't it up here?
I think it actually is. Sorry, I can't see it very clearly here.
There you go, at the bottom. Not this one?
Actually, we move these around a little bit for 4.8 since we're also adding another feature in 4.8, which is the OBB download, which needs to have your app ID key, which is used for downloading the OBB if it's missing from the Google Play Store.
That's not the Google Play app ID, right? Is that? Because this is optional.
We actually moved that one. That one is used in order to get into the Google Play game services, but it also is used for the check license in order to do a download from the OBB.
So maybe it's worth mentioning or talking about the OBB stuff. That's pretty critical to Android development. Android has a 50 megabyte limit on executable or APKs that you install on the phone. And so if your game is bigger than 50 megs, which is very easy to do, especially in this day and age with large textures and all that stuff, then Google does have a concept of an OBB file. I'm not sure what it stands for exactly.
It's
but
an opaque binary blob.
It's a blob. So it's a big blob of data.
Blob file, of course.
And so we handle making that OBB file for you when you package up your content. All the content that's not the executable and its icons, we will put into an OBB file. And so when you do file package for Android, what it spits out is an APK, an OBB file, and a batch file that you can just run to install onto a device. Or you can just take the APK and the OBB and upload it to the Google Play Store. But if your game is small, like Tappy Chicken is, then there's an option right here in the settings, which we can get back on the screen. This package game data inside APK. If you set that to true, if you click that checkbox, then we actually take all your data and put it inside the APK file. And if you do that, then, and it's less than 50 megabytes, then you can just upload that and you're done. But if your game is too big, then it's not going to work. But if you're going for Amazon, they do want all the data inside a single APK. So actually, if you're going to distribute to Amazon, then you would want to check this box, make a package, and upload it to Amazon. They don't have that 50 megabyte limit. But one issue is texture format, where if you want to handle different texture formats, then you're going to really bloat your data size if you put all the texture formats into one. So really, when you file package for texture format, it'll make a different OBB for each texture format. And then you can do things in the Play Store to filter out which OBB gets downloaded for the device based on its texture format.
You can set up feature level filters on the store, and that will pick which of the OBBs will be used for the download.
Yeah. So it's kind of a pain, but it's a requirement of Android, just all the different texture formats. That said, ETC1 is supported on every device out there. And well, why not just always use ETC1? The problem is that it does not handle alpha textures. So if you have a texture with an alpha channel in it, like a mask or translucent, whatever, we just take that texture and we decompress it. So it's full uncompressed size, which can get very big. So if you have a lot of alpha, your download size is going to be huge if you have a lot of alpha textures with etc1. So ways to mitigate that are, well, don't use etc1 and use different texture formats for each device type, or you can take your textures and split the alpha channel out into a separate texture and use that as a mask or what have you, and then use RGB textures. And they'll both be compressed as etc1, and then they'll be a lot smaller. But you will have to modify your materials to handle two different textures for alpha versus RGB. So it's not something that we can actually just do because of the material changes needed to do it. But coming in 4.8, as Chris was mentioning, there is the OBB downloader. So at startup, we can look to see if the OBB file exists on your device, and if it's not, we can re-get it from the Google Play Store. Because sometimes the OBB file will be deleted or may not have been downloaded on your device, but the APK, the program itself, might be on the device. So,
Right. And for iOS?
So iOS is a lot through the developer site, and then you end up getting your provision and your certificate through the developer site first. Otherwise, you can't even put it on your device in the first place. And that here is the top portion of this. In 4.7, we tried to make this a little more clear for people by having these lists of what we found, and we turn the ones green that are actually the ones we're going to try to use. In a future release, probably not 4.8, but beyond that, we'll also make it so that you can actually select which one you want it to use. So if you have multiple provisions and certificates on your device or on your machine, we'll allow you to pick which one you want us to use. And then you set up all of your bundle IDs here at this spot, which we're waiting on an import of your certificate. And that will all be what you will want to match against your provision. Now, what we recommend when you first start, if you've never done this before at all, is you make a wildcard provision, so it'll match any bundle identifier you put in there, any app ID you put in there. But as you get closer to actually launching your game and putting it on the App Store, you will actually need to have a specific provision and a specific app ID, which will go into the bundle identifier section. And that will all match up with what you are going to be putting into iTunes Connect. So iTunes Connect is where you actually set up your application. It's a website that Apple provides. You set up your application there, providing the various screenshots you'll need to show in the store, any videos if you want nowadays that they've got the video portion, as well as information about your application that'll show up in the store. So we don't have any of that stuff here. That's all in that website. But the piece you'll probably need also is that version info. So we have that one that as well, similar to Android. You set that. That's what actually will be used by Apple and the App Store to version your actual IPA in your app. But we also do internally, we generate a sub number so that if you for whatever reason you have to update your application before it goes live, then that number will automatically be updated and you'll get a new executable that'll show up in your iTunes Connect. The one thing that we have to stress more than anything is that when you want to actually put your application on the store or get it up to iTunes, you have to do it with a Mac. There's a particular application on the Mac called the app uploader or something like that, that is only on a Mac, so you have to do it from the Mac. As of right now, for content-only projects, that's the only time you really need the Mac. But for a code project, you would need to be on the Mac to build it all. In 4.8, we're releasing that restriction, and you'll still need a Mac to build, but you won't have to actually be on that Mac. You'll have to just set it up to accept your request from your PC to be able to build the code on your PC, or build the code on the Mac from your PC. So you'll be able to do a whole round trip for your development purposes with code. And in the case of content-based projects, if you want to include, for instance, a plugin that's not on by default, it will allow you to include that and recreate the executable, including that plugin. Things like that will be coming in 4.8.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So it's going to be down here under build in iOS section. it may actually move out to maybe an iOS SDK section. I'm not sure, possibly, but it will. You have to type in the name of the Mac that you're going to connect to, a username, because it used SSH, or the authenticated secure networking, to send commands over and the files over with rsync. So you'll have to set up the authentication, but we do it with keys. So you generate a key one time from the Mac, it brings the key over, and then you can use that key file to not have to type your password in every time you want to build, which would be a nightmare. But we do it in a secure way, so as long as you have the key file on your Windows machine, then you can send commands over. You can even check that key file into your source control so that other people on your team can just use that same Mac if you want. And then if you need to, you can just like remove that key on the Mac side and then remove access by that key file. So you can do it. It's pretty secure. We did have a way to do this before, the remote compiling, but it was not secure at all, and so we never really documented it, and it wasn't super nice. But you may have seen people trying to do it on the forums where we're talking about that. But now using SSH, it's way better, and more importantly, it can actually delete files from the other side. So one problem before was it would send files over, and then it would leave them there. So if you renamed the file on the Windows side and did a resync over, it wouldn't delete the old version, and then it could get including the wrong header files and stuff, so you have to delete them. It's kind of a mess. So that's why we never really officially supported it, because we knew this was coming, and now we're finally ready to release it. So if you got a Mac somewhere on your network, even outside your network, you can slowly, if you're doing it outside the network, compile iOS code from Windows. So,
it's pretty useful.
Yeah.
We do have quite a few other topics here, but I think that based on the questions we've gotten in, we should be able to cover them just by answering the questions.
Okay.
It seems like it's
one last thing, actually.
Oh,
in packaging settings, when you are packaging for the build, you need to check this for distribution checkbox. This will tell Android to use that signing, that key store signing. You don't need that until you're doing a development build or distribution build. And for iOS, that will tell it needs to look for distribution provision profiles and certificates, because they are different, and they have to be signed with distribution profiles and certificate when you upload to the two stores. On Android, you can always do for distribution and test it, but on iOS, if you check that checkbox, then it makes an executable that you can't actually run and test. So it's like the last thing you do when you're going to upload it. Except for there's the ad hoc distribution, which
we don't
really
formally support the ad hoc provisions, but technically, if you do a for distribution checkbox and it finds the ad hoc, it potentially will use that, especially if you don't have a regular distribution provision. It will use that and sign it with that, and then you can actually use that to distribute amongst your company and that sort of stuff. The other thing that you might want to do for, like you said, if with for distribution on iOS, you can't test the app, but you can, when you're packaging, you can make a shipping build, and that will be as close as possible to the final app that you'll get on the on the App Store. The last thing I was going to mention is that the other reason why we actually auto-generate this, update this incremental number every time we build, is so that for those of you using TestFlight in iTunes Connect, it will automatically have a new unique identifier every time that you can associate with the TestFlight data that you need for your various users that are testing your app. So.
All right. Yeah, there's always an ever-critical checkbox somewhere, so for distribution. Good one to know.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So that's the gist of getting started and getting packaged and getting shipped. So let's go over to the Q&A section here and see what we can do. So the first question that we have off of the forums was about how can I implement gestures like a swipe, like a simple swipe. Now, we're here to more talk about the packaging side of things, but I did want to make sure that a few of these were addressed. You can actually go on the forums and look up, I think it's just called, you can just look up swipe. And actually, I'm going to post this link in the chat, so if you're watching on YouTube later, you'll have to probably search it on the forums yourself. But we do have an example kind of put out there. I think, was it Mark Audi that did this?
Actually, I believe it was one of our users that posted this.
Oh, yeah, this is Maparizao. Okay. Don't know how to pronounce the username properly, probably, but did a great job
There it is.
explaining swipe
Yeah.
on there. And you can, there we go. Thank you so much, Josh. And so, big explanation. And
If you scroll down a little bit in there, you'll see.
yeah, let's get
his
some. There's
version
some
of
pictures to
blueprints
go
and
with it.
things.
Real nice blue. It's all blueprint. I know some of you were apprehensive about getting into code, so
Just don't call him sir.
All right. Let's see here. Chris, this one's for you because I guess you were the one that answered it, and we actually have a tab for it too. But
Okay.
how do I set the name of the application in Android?
Okay, currently the name that's actually going to show up is going to match your project name when it generates it. But there is a trick you can use by going ahead and creating a strings XML file in the resource directory in the Android build directory, and that one will get copied over instead and override it. As I said, there is a forum post here that he is pointing to which actually shows an example of what should go into this string file and the exact path it should go in. This will let you basically put any displayable name you want on your application.
All right. Another one that we do have some explanation for that came in was how how do I make in-app purchasing with UE4 for both systems, Android and iOS? And here's a nice one by Terrence Burns, explaining how that one is done.
Terrence is another one of our engineers who works on iOS and Android at times. The second of the blueprints in here is the most current way to do this.
Yeah.
And it should work as of 4.7.
All right.
I think someone had asked about this, about restoring a purchase for one-time purchases, and I don't believe we have an API exposed for that
No,
yet.
not yet.
So we'll have to add that for sure. Definitely is needed.
All right. How do you feel about that?
Okay, so one question, Windows Phone support. We have no current plans right now to do Windows Phone. We had thought about it and looked at it, and just given the numbers and taking resources away from Android and iOS, it didn't make business sense currently to work on Windows Phone, so it's not a priority. There's a lot of code in there already for WinRT support, which will help someone get going on Windows Phone, but it's not something that we're actively working on.
Do you think that could change in the future if there's like a market share shift?
Yeah, if Windows Phone blows up, then sure. I mean, anything that has market share is definitely has a definite business case. So yeah, just everyone support their Windows Phone, and maybe that'll change.
Yeah, make some noise.
Yeah.
So will 4.8 bring more device support, and can UE4 develop tiny games for Apple Watch, which is something I've been kind of curious about too.
So Apple Watch, you don't actually run code on the watch. All you're doing is displaying things, and then it can talk back to your phone. So I actually made my first Apple Watch app at home last night to do, I mean, you click buttons on your watch, and it talks to the game on your phone, and it does very limited interaction. There's not much you can really do. I mean, with UE4 itself, you can't like run 3D content on there, and so maybe we'll be able to add support in there so you can communicate to the watch, but it's not a high priority because there's so little you can actually do on the watch itself, other than like some basic buttons that are controlling the game. But if it's in your pocket, do you really need UE4? You interact with UE4 games on your wrist? I don't know.
I mean, I could see how the case could be made for. Oh yeah, it's sort of like the Power Glove. You just have the controller sideways on your arm. And just
Yeah,
play
but
it.
you can't really see the output too much.
Yeah, I'm just not sure how you're going to hold your iPhone and use the watch at the same time for that.
So if we can come up with a cool use case for it, maybe. I mean, the technology is there. We can definitely talk to it. We just setting it up at home. Xcode does a lot of stuff for you to set up the interaction between the phone, the background extension, and the app itself. It would take a lot of work to do that in just the way that we're doing UE4. Anyway, so a lot of work for not too much bang at the moment.
Extra device.
Available device memory.
Yeah.
Okay, there is a standard call you can use.
Yeah.
F.
So just to clarify, the question is there a way to get the available device memory be good, especially for Android, for dynamically choosing the quality of assets to load, for example?
F platform memory get stats will allow you to get back some of this information. It's unfortunate, though, that the amount of available memory at any given time is going to be dependent on garbage collection. So the numbers you get back may or may not be the actual amount of memory you can use.
Yeah, the OS will keep everything in memory, and then it'll like toss background apps when it needs more memory, but you don't know what it can be able to toss.
Right.
So on iOS, what we've done in the past is we just know some devices have this much memory that you're guaranteed to get. And is in our device profiles concept, there's a whole thing called device profiles where you change settings per device or device like bucket. So iOS, we just do one for each device type. For Android, we have more buckets. We can say for iPhone 5S, we turn off this rendering feature, and our texture LED bias is such and such, so that we just use lower res textures on certain devices. And that's just more, either we know what that device can do, or we have some guesses based on this device bucket of what sort of quality level you would have. Mm-hmm. Because the runtime memory you get is not going to be entirely accurate, because it's the way that both OSs work.
Yeah. Are there any plans for general performance improvements for older devices, e.g. Tegra 3?
Okay, so we've recently had to make the decision that we're going to focus mainly on mid-tier and higher devices on both platforms. So things like the iPhone 4 or Galaxy S3, those are really hard to get running well in the kind of games that people are making with UV4. So we're putting our focus going forward onto the mid and up devices, mid being iPhone 4S or 5 or Galaxy S4 and up, that sort of the class of device. Tegra 3 is actually not very super powerful. That's probably going to be more on the low end where we're not focusing things. We don't expect to just suddenly stop working on them, but our focus going forward is going to have to be on the middle and up class of devices.
You will see in 4.8 some of the older devices will now work, and some will have better performance than they did have, but it is not the forward focus.
Yeah, like Adreno 200s now are working better than they were, I think. And yeah, so we have a whole crap ton of devices that we look at, and based on, we sort them by GPU and everything, and we just look at what the devices are capable of, because some of those older ones just are missing core features that are important. And to try and do we're going to add better shadowing and lighting to the mid-tier devices, and trying to get that same level of features on the low-end devices either is impossible, or make it run really slow, or take a lot of engineering effort that is better spent on devices that are more applicable to UV4 titles.
All right. Let's see. Not sure.
So
that one.
Let's see. What devices does Epic QA against or test
go with
against?
that
So
one.
that's basically what I just sort of covered.
We do have a wiki page which does show which devices we actually are doing testing on.
Yes.
Do you have that link?
I've copied those into the chat, but just so if you're watching this, I always like to say this, if you're watching this on YouTube after we've uploaded this, you're not going to have the chat available. So go to wiki.unrealengine.com and just search for device compatibility, and you'll get one for iOS and one for Android. And that's a list of things that not only we've tested, but since it's a wiki and publicly editable, other people have come on and reported their experiences personally with it. So you've got a little bit of what Epic has said and some information from the community as well.
So how much time do we have left, actually? Is there
we can
just so I
go.
can
We've got another
prioritize?
10 minutes if you'd like.
Okay.
I mean, we have quite a few questions, and I'm sure that people want to get a few more of these answered real fast. Let's see here.
All right. Let's see. All right, DLC packaging. are there any plans to expose DLC cooking and packaging to the editor instead of being limited to the command line tools? I'm not sure yet. Well, for UT, something we've been working on for UT, where for doing mods, they want to be able to cook a mod from the editor. That may be a little UT specific because of the way it handles mods, as you want to be able to like say new mod in the editor as a sort of almost a new project. So UT is a little special, but that's kind of where you might see the beginnings of this in the editor. Right now, there isn't, I don't know of any plans we have actually to expose DLC as a first class concept in the editor in a general way that's not what UT is doing. But I guess actually I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest. So that is an interesting feature request, I suppose. DLC and patching has been something that we've been focusing on lately for all platforms need DLC and patching at some point. So DLC's been in there for a while, where you cook DLC and you tell it that you cook your game and you give it like a version stamp. And then when you cook DLC, I want to cook these two maps or whatever against this version stamp of the packaged up game that you theoretically have released already. So then it won't cook anything into the DLC that's already in the shipped game.
Oh, okay.
And patching is sort of similar to the way DLC works. Oh, and DLC will just generate a pack file. So as you may know, if you can take all your content and you put it into a single pack file, and so you release this single pack file is a giant blob of data, which actually is an OBB file, is basically a pack file. But then a DLC can be packaged up as a single pack file that you can release, however, depending on the platform. And patching is actually kind of similar, where you can when you generate a patch of data, it will look at the shipped game and then cook out new content, and it will look at file differences to compare them. So actually we've been working a lot on deterministic cooking, so that when you cook your game and then cook it again, if the source asset didn't change, the cooked asset won't be any different. We have to make a lot of changes there for that, but it'll make it so that when you're making a patch, a file diff is good enough to know that this package needs to be released in your patch. This is for content patching, by the way. Yeah.
Let's see. How do we make it so the virtual joystick doesn't move around?
Yeah.
Okay, there is a recenter checkbox, which is you go into input.
Isn't it an asset?
Actually,
Engine input.
yeah.
Is it here?
Okay, the default under mobile touch interface,
Okay.
you can edit this, and there will be a recenter in there.
Got an amazing graphic right there. Very high res.
Okay.
But see, is this the? No, that's the.
Go back.
You've
one.
edited the wrong one.
Yeah,
This is the wrong
you
thing.
clicked the wrong asset. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a touch interface. It's actually
Did I not click on it?
it's just messing with you.
Product settings.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
go to
these
input.
virtual joysticks are.
okay. That asset there,
An
if
asset
you
here.
explore that one and open it, then you can turn on off the
Oh, there it
recenter.
is.
Yeah, there it
Okay.
is.
Sorry.
Aha. Okay.
Prevent recenter.
Prevent recenter. Turn that checkbox on. That'll fix that issue.
Awesome.
And you can change all sorts of other settings here. And you can make your own.
You can actually
with these
make
assets.
completely different joysticks. You can change the graphics.
Mhm.
You can change the zones.
Yeah. So this controls here. If you open up the controls, you can see this one only has one, which is left. This is the left thumbstick only. But this one here, the default one, has two, which are. They look very similar, but they're at different offsets, and they have different.
There are different
they do
locations on
things.
screen.
Mm-hmm.
And they will
This,
control different inputs here. So this is the right thumbstick. Here, this is left thumbstick. So it emulates an actual joystick. This may be replaced eventually with UMG and not be this way anymore. But this is how to do UI in the editor before UMG could talk to Slate.
That's really good to know. Our For Android, is it possible to compress OBB files at the moment, or is that coming soon?
Actually, you can do it now. If you go into the cook settings, you need to have -pack and -compressed when you
Is
do the
that-
cook.
Is that exposed in 4.7? I think that's.
I don't know if it's exposed, but you can do it with the project launcher by putting in the advanced cook settings.
Yeah.
In 4.8, it's just a checkbox.
Yeah. So this project launcher is a very powerful tool here that's in the editor. Especially if you click on advanced, there's a lot of. Oh no, we want a custom profile.
You want to make a new
custom
you make a
Yes.
new profile.
So you make a custom profile, and you can change how you can split your project. You can set how you're going to cook it, how you want to package it up. Do you want to
And-
use cook on the fly?
And in this case, you would
Uh,
go into the cook section, and there is a section there for additional parameters. And you just make sure you have -pack and -compressed here.
Yeah. The compressed should be exposed, I think, in 4.8 in the editor.
It is.
in the packaging settings. So. Facebook API, we have that now for iOS, right? And Android? Both? Or just
For iOS.
Just iOS?
I
That's
do
something we've
not
been
believe
working
we
on.
have it on Android at the moment.
Okay. That's sort of a work in progress there. For the Facebook API, so you'll be able to like post to your newsfeed or whatever from the game.
Yeah, they've
And
recently
get friends lists and all that.
The API for Facebook just recently changed. We were waiting for iOS to get that in first, and then we were going to take a look at using the newer one
And
going forward in Android.
And iOS was integrated recently, so it should be in 4.8 actually.
Yeah.
And kind of like in that same thought of social media, any ideas for, it says here, further Android API integrations, share feature, any plans? So are there any plans for a share? I guess, like you always see, like you're playing games like, hey, share on Facebook, share on Twitter, all that.
You can go in and add that now if you want to by adding your own custom Java code, and anything that you put into the build library directories will get copied into the APK. So it is possible right now to extend using the Java side if you'd like to. And you can also hook up blueprint nodes yourself in C++ code by calling through with the JNI calls.
Oh, cool. All right. All right. Well, looks like we're about there on time. So if there's anything you guys want to throw in before we say adios to the people, we can, if you want to get one of those real fast.
One thing, can we assume all new devices are supported inherently, like Galaxy Tab S? Going forward, on Android, no, not necessarily, because they're still making Android devices that are utter garbage, really. And they run really old OSs and have really crappy GPUs, and they cost $50. So if your device has a price tag of $400 or more, sure. But devices that sell at Best Buy for $75 are good odds are really old hardware. There's a reason they're cheap. So not necessarily, but a Galaxy Tab, sure, it should be no problem going forward. But not every Android device is newer than all previous Android devices. So
Let's see.
Cool. All right.
and new 3DS, no, that thing is not. It's not there yet for me.
Not on the timeline of stuff to do.
Yeah, if you can't have programmable pixel shaders,
programmable
ones.
pickle shaders.
Yeah.
I like pickle shaders. They're nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
And let's see, is there going to be device camera texture for augmented reality? The media plugin is going to be extended at some point to support getting texture information from other devices than just from the streamed video from a file. When that is in place, then we will have support for that as well.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, augmented reality has been kind of a hot thing. So, all right. Well, it looks like we've run a little bit over on time, but I think that's great. We actually got to address a lot. But I hope you all enjoyed the stream. Tune in on Thursday because Chance, of course, has some really amazing stuff to show you all, and we'll see you all around. It's been great. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.